Piedmont, Alabama was the venue for the National Criterium Calendar's Sunny King Criterium last weekend, and it offered a great chance for amateur riders to see just how slow their races actually are when compared to pro-ams and domestic pros. Thankfully, the venue had alcohol in close proximity to help riders cope with the sudden and dramatic loss of their egos. The races were live-streamed online in really awesome quality, so if you're interested in checking out any of the races in the NCC circuit, because they stream all of them, I'll go ahead and put a link in the description of this video that you can go down and click on and check out for yourself. And I'll also add a link to the footage of the Sunny King Criterium. They recorded all the races from the Cat 5 race all the way to the Pro 1 race that evening. Anyway, the Forest Crit started like every crit does, with riders at the front of the 70-plus person group making their way leisurely through turns, while riders closer to the back of the group got accordioned hard enough to make them rethink the whole exercise thing. The course had 4 left-hand corners and a noticeable uphill finish that was long enough out of the last turn that a sprinter would have a really hard time jumping the distance themselves. The road also had a noticeable camber to it to drain rain off the road, so a traditional racing line really did not feel as responsive as a flat road would have, as an outside-inside outside racing line put a rider off camber while they came in and out of the turn, which sort of resulted in a few riders overcooking turns and ending up on the pavement in the lower levels. And even the pro race saw a Novo Nordisk rider end up in the barriers on the outside of the 4th corner. Throughout the race, riders usually chose to advance their position on the uphill section if they were a little lighter, and then on the downhill section if they were a little larger, and the race sort of stayed together and didn't do any reshuffling on the 2 flat sections. The race was fairly fast, but for the most part there weren't a lot of tactics or strategy going on, which is how most crits usually play out. It usually ends in a bunch sprint, especially at the lower levels. And yes, there were some probing attacks, and some riders even managed to stay off the front for a few laps, but the attacks came too infrequently for the field to ever really be uncomfortable, so they all got wound in the end. There was a notable exception to this, and a late flyer by Brian Cole of Marietta, Georgia, who nearly took the win in the last 1 or 2 laps as the main sprinters in the peloton sort of bickered and fought over who was going to cover the break. But in the last lap, Matt Robbins and Michalee got sick of it and slammed the door on the lone rider. Into the last lap, attacks went out on the climb, and the pace stayed really high as riders realized the number of chances they would have to move up in the group was quickly approaching 0, and they decided to really go for it late in the race, which is sort of normal. Everybody kind of swarms. The final turn saw Michalee of IAM Racing on the front, with Matt Robbins of Hub Racing and David Kuntz of Village Volkswagen in tow. Robbins jumped early for the sprint and somehow managed to hold off the charging David Kuntz, who took second. Deja vu, anyone? Both riders are really strong sprinters, and they've been really dominant so far this season, and time will tell if a new hope can rise up and really punish them for their sprint-centered riding on the climbs in the coming weeks. The road race was 45 miles through the rolling northeast Alabama mountains, with 2 Category 4 climbs that were both in the second half of the race. Despite a moderately sized field, there weren't many teams with lots of riders. Mellow Mushroom, Village Volkswagen, and Grindstone Performance Cycling had the largest squads that were there. And the race had a neutral rollout, which is really awesome because it ensures that people aren't going to fall over while they attempt to clip into their pedals, which A, shatters their pride, which is an injury that often needs dozens of hugs to recover from, and B, falls at the beginning of races usually set a really nervous tone at an already nervous time at the beginning of a race. So it's really good for neutral rollouts to not set that really frantic tone. As probing attacks started to go out, the field would surge, and Grindstone and Mellow Mushroom would be near the front, but no real counterattacking went on, and this sort of like jump and surge and regroup style racing continued for the first 10 or so miles until the peloton turned out of the tailwind and into a crosswind, whereupon IAM Racing and Mellow Mushroom really took control of the group and made pace while the longest breaks of the day went off the front. Even with the climbs, nothing really had hope of succeeding, thanks to a really strong wind that left riders off the front looking back in fear immediately after their attack, more than up the road. Over the second climb, the group exploded, and a break of 8 strong riders came over the top together. The peloton reorganized on the fast ascent with a whipping tailwind, and panic gripped the group as they realized that there were only 3 or so miles left to race, and a solid 15 or 20 seconds between the groups. Riders attacked, attempting to make the bridge, but the chase group was always able to cover, which led to more attacks, which leapfrogged the peloton back to the break, so with about 2 kilometers to go, it was pretty much together. A flyer went out from Mellow Mushroom rider Brad Cox, but the speed of the peloton was too great, and he was swept up with just under 1,000 meters to go. Through the last corner, the group was heavily bunched, and riders on the inside of the turn had to rely on less than favorable lines if they wanted to contest the sprint, which caused a minor crash that sent a few riders into the ditch. No team really had any organization thanks to how hectic the post-climb chase had been, and with 300 meters to go, the tension sort of snapped into a really long, tacticless drag race that saw Grindstone's Michael Vasco take the win over Village Volkswagen's J.C. Emberton, with Doug Robinson from the Donahue Infinity Racing Squad rounding out the top three. Justin Schmidt of the DePaula Racing Team had a strategy to match his bright red kit and was the group's most aggressive rider, attacking repeatedly and often for most of the day. Even with his suicidal aggression and no teammates, he managed to stay in the group till he finally got dropped into the run into the sprint. I'm Jake Pratt of IAM Racing, and I wish I had Sergio Hernandez's legs.